Hey guys. Oh, we got some watchers already. Good. Welcome to the March 20th RMF Q&A. It's a Wednesday, not a Saturday. Doing things a little bit differently this week. It's Wednesday, and we're also offering this Q&A to everybody who wants to drop in, including the big group members, the private subscribers, and the subscribers to my YouTube channel as well, who I don't have much contact with, unfortunately. But anyway, for those of you who are not familiar with the content that we offer to our regular community subscribers, this hour-long live Q&A is something I do for members every Saturday, like I said. Well, there goes my cat sneezing on the counter. He was sneezing today, and that's why he's sitting on the counter, because I haven't fed him yet today. I want him to get over that little sniffle. Anyway, the members normally receive a link in an email on Saturday that they receive to join this live, and I also post it in the private group. But once in a while, we like to offer the opportunity to the wider RMF audience to give people a chance to get their questions answered by somebody who's heard pretty much all the questions, and that would be myself. I always start the Q&A with a bunch of topics related to dog health that I research and sort of curate for you guys, and then I open up the floor for questions from viewers. So get your questions lined up, and I will go ahead and cover the things that I said I was going to do. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about was that fasting video that was shared on both Facebook groups this week. And I will post a link. It occurs to me that I don't think I put the link to that in the email that went out to the members. So for the people who are not on Facebook, I will post the link to that video in the description box so you can see what I'm talking about here. And I'm sorry I didn't do that, because you would have had a chance to watch it ahead of time. So now you'll already know my feedback when you watch it. But sorry if I'm doing a spoiler now, but I do encourage you to watch it, because it's a long time in coming. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Oh, Jan says the sound is good. Thanks, Jan. I always like getting a sound check. So, of course, it was amazing and stupendous to see the idea of withholding food from a dog for 10 days being entertained somewhere besides in my writings, because I am the only one I'm aware of that's been talking about fasting dogs for 15 or 20 years and getting very little except abuse for it. So this video, like I said, is long overdue, and I hope it's just the beginning. Now, there are a couple things. That's sort of where the good news ends, where this video is concerned, because just the fact that it talks about the topic of fasting in such a favorable light is a huge step forward, and especially since we've gone past that artificial threshold that's been built in the minds of dog owners of 1 day or 3 days or 5 days or whatever. I've seen vets, holistic vets, talk about 5 days. I've never seen anybody talk about 10 days. So that's spectacular. And this information, by the way, came to the maker of the video from a naturopath. And I have a feeling that if that was not a human naturopath, that he might have been a little more conservative with the recommended number of fasting days, or it may have had to do with the fact that the dog didn't show any progress after 5 days. And what are we always telling people in the group? Sometimes 5 days is the minimum, because you don't see anything turn around very often until the 6th day or later. So, but anyway, there are a few points that I wanted to make about the herbs that were used by the owner in the video. And, you know, I think it's just extremely unfortunate that the video maker gives all the credit to these herbs for healing her dog. And I've told this story to the private group before about the medical doctor around the turn of the 20th century who used to dispense his special pills. He had these special pills. He alone manufactured them. People could do that in those days. And they were actually just sugar pills. So they acted as a placebo because the instructions that he gave his patients is that they were not permitted to eat while they were taking this special pill that would make them sick if they did. And the truth is, if they had eaten, they probably would have felt worse. So they would feel the effects right away. They would get that evidence back, right? They were told they must fast on water only for at least 7 days. So needless to say, everyone who did this got well, and people beat a path to this guy's door. And I don't know what ever became of that doctor. And I don't even remember his name, but I'm sure at some point he ran afoul of the medical industry because they don't like it when doctors do the right thing. But the point is, the body always does the healing. And that all of those people who took those sugar pills were already, at the turn of the century, programmed to credit healing to substances rather than to their body's ability to heal themselves. And the same mistake is being made every day in our current medically brainwashed culture. And the second point I wanted to make is that this naturopath that sold her the herbs and told her to fast her dog is probably the best we can hope for when we seek counsel from holistic practitioners. That's an understatement. That's the very best we can hope for. They would not be in business if they did the right thing and only told you that what the causes of your dog's problems are, how to remove the causes, and to fast your dog until he is well. That's what we do. We lay types that have nothing to lose. We have nothing invested in the medical system. In order for that guy to be able to dispense this advice, he has to sell products. If he didn't, he wouldn't have a practice or a platform from which to, dispense the information. And the third point relates to an experience I had about 10 years ago that is relevant to the illness that the dog in the video was suffering from. And that experience has to do with a very sick golden retriever that was in my care that had also been diagnosed with pancreatitis. I saw him through it, but it did not take 10 days of fasting. It only took 3 days of fasting and 5 days of just eating plant foods. So it's very likely that in the case of this little dog in the video, and I know there's a whole range of severity when it comes to pancreatitis, but it's very likely that this little dog would have gotten well faster if it hadn't been for those herbs. They were actually burdening his body, and his body got well in spite of the herbs, not because of them. So anyway, and just one more point about the video, not about the herbs, but about the video, is how the owner was treated by the allopathic vet. I think it's very telling that she was so ready to give luck the credit for healing this dog. She just said, "You've been lucky." How often have those of us who understand that the body heals itself heard that from medical practitioners? "Oh, you were just lucky. Oh, you didn't get a vaccine. Oh, you didn't get sick. You're just lucky. Your luck is working in your favor." So the owner credits the herb and the vet credits the, blind luck. And the whole time it was the body that did it all. And what this delusional thinking does is it just disrespects the miraculous self-healing abilities of the body. It's really a shame how little respect we give to nature. So that's all I wanted to say about the video. I do hope that if you haven't seen that, you will check the link out, because I will definitely be including that in the description. And it generally takes me a day or two to get the topics put up in the description. So if you don't see it till tomorrow, it will be up soon. And the next topic I have here is this list of what's called climacteric fruits, which means climacteric means they ripen off the tree or the vine, and non-climacteric means they do not ripen off the vine. And among the non-climacteric are things like pears, Asian pears. Regular pears do. Isn't that interesting? Asian pears don't, but pears do, like the Bartlett pears do. You can buy Bartlett pears that are just barely yellow. And I think they're actually a very good pear to feed to dogs because you can buy them when they're just barely yellow or even slightly green, and they will ripen just fine. I mean, as long as they've not been in refrigeration too long. Refrigeration really messes up a lot of fruits, but some of the others that don't ripen off the tree are some of these don't apply to dogs at all. Many of them don't apply to dogs at all. Watermelon does not ripen. It's interesting because other melons do. Cucumbers do not ripen off the tree, off the vine. Coconuts do not ripen off the vine. Cherries, blackberries, bitter melon, and that's really everything else is pretty much like citrus or too acidic for dogs, or too exotic like loquats and lychees. You're not going to be able to get those. And if you can, you're probably not going to be feeding them to your dog. The ones that do ripen off the vine are things like apricots, apples. And I have to wonder about apples. There's actually a few on here that I have to wonder about, but I'll just read the list to you. Apricots, atamoya, avocado, banana, blueberries, canary melons, cantaloupes, cassava melon, cherimoyas, dates, durians, honeydew, jackfruit, nectarines, papayas, peaches, pears, persimmons, plums, and tomatoes. And there are some here that are on this list that I really don't think they do ripen very much off of the tree. And one is apples. Apples do sweeten up if you let them sit around for a while. But I think they need to be fully colored. And same with figs. I have picked unripe figs and they really do need to spend lots of time on the tree or they're not going to ripen at all. And the same goes for tomatillos. I don't think tomatillos do a whole lot of ripening off the vine either. So anyway, I will publish that list somewhere. Maybe I'll put it in the files on the Facebook group for you guys. And somebody mentioned on the big group, feeding cooked foods to dogs. And I've already talked a lot about this, but I did want to add a couple more things that I thought of just recently. And one is that what we're trying to do here is make things as easy and sustainable for owners as possible. I want more dog owners home feeding. I don't want to make it more difficult, more esoteric, more mysterious, more elite or competitive. I want to make it easy. We have people who don't like to cook and they buy fruit on a daily or weekly basis, and it's no trouble for them to do so for their dogs. I do that. It's no problem. I prefer it. But we have others who live in remote locations and are not able to buy fruit even weekly. Fruit is perishable. They can buy, however, shelf-stable quinoa and yams that can be stored for long periods and made in batches very cheaply. This may appeal to some people, in addition to all the other reasons why certain select cooked food, plant foods need to stay on the table as an option. And also in the book, I tell the story of my friend who I knew would not stop feeding kibble to his dog. And so I knew it would just fall on deaf ears if I told him about raw feeding, or even if I told him about feeding fruit to his dog. So I told him to feed kibble only every other day. I suspected that he would not feed fruit. It would seem weird to him, or the dog wouldn't eat it. So I suggested that he make a big batch of quinoa and yams every week and feed it on alternate days. I knew that I was dealing with somebody with a normie perspective, and knowing how protein crazed people are, I told him that quinoa is high in protein and could effectively replace some of the protein in the kibble. Whether this idea is valid or not, it's the perception out there in normie land, and that's what we have to work with. Well, my friend loved the idea, and the dog has not had a symptom in 3 years since he started doing that. The dog literally glows with good health. Before that, he was in and out of the vet's office every other month for ear infections, and that just ended. No more ear problems. And eventually, I did introduce to my friend the idea of feeding fruit instead of cooked foods on some days, but I don't think he ever did that, except maybe for the random snack, like most dog owners do. So, the point of my telling you that story is that one of the points is that we have to tailor our advice according to whether the ground that we're planting seeds in, is fertile. And the suggestion I gave to my friend would have been completely different if I'd known he was open to the truth, but I knew him and I knew that he wouldn't be. But everyone who knows me or knows anything about RMF knows that I like to err on the side of nature. And that's why when all other factors are equal or favorable, I recommend raw plant foods. But there truly are legitimate reasons for some people to include cooked foods, plant foods in their dog's diet. Just yesterday, I popped into the big group and saw someone comment that her dog had reversed kidney disease eating a 6-to-1 rotation with cooked yams and quinoa and one meat meal per week. So that means 6 days in a row of eating yams and quinoa. She said she'd wish she could have afforded more fruit, but her dog did very well eating mostly cooked plant foods. She also said that the dog self-fasted many days, so I suspect the dog was rejecting fruit when she was able to offer it. It's most likely the case that she could feed fruit instead of cooked foods later on and see even more improvements in the dog if she did that, because it usually happens that dogs take to fruit more readily if they've been on RMF for a while. And I've known dogs that would not eat bananas. Everybody always says, bananas are cheap, feed bananas. They're super cheap, 50 cents a pound sometimes. Well, I've known lots of dogs that wouldn't eat bananas. So, what's an owner supposed to do when they are not willing to fast their dogs? If you can hold out for 5 days, you can generally convince any dog, although I've done that with dogs and had them still reject fruit after 5 or 6 days. So that doesn't always work. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that. Just a little more info about that topic. Well, apart from my next topic, apart from that fasting video that just had me watching with my mouth open, I also got an email this week that made me have the same reaction. And let me see. And I wanted to thank her, by the way, for sharing that with me. And it's about something that was unfamiliar to me at the time, and it's called presumptive language. And it's a little circuitous for me to explain how this relates to the health of our dogs, but it relates to the subject of vaccine hesitancy that I addressed in the past couple of videos. So this member sent me an email, and here's what she said, quote, "The other day I was reading something, and the author said in Gavin de Becker's classic book, The Gift of Fear, he points out that the use of presumptive language is a form of manipulation designed to reduce the victim's ability to assert boundaries or disagree, thereby making them more vulnerable to exploitation or harm. I cannot emphasize strongly enough how important it is to recognize it, interrupt it, and take back control immediately without apology. Never allow anybody to use this tactic on you." End of quote. Well, I have a feeling that whoever it was that said that, and Gavin de Becker, who wrote the book that delivered this point, would have a different context in mind when they're telling us that we need to interrupt it immediately and hold your line, hold the no. Never allow anybody to use that tactic, because I'll explain why in a minute. I did watch, just to give you a little glimpse of what you'll find when you go looking for information on this on the internet. I did that because I wanted to get some background on this book, The Gift of Fear. So I watched a short video. And this guy, Gavin DeBecker, has made the rounds with all of the talk show hosts and whatnot, starting way back like in the early 90s, I think. He appeared on the Oprah Winfrey show, and there was a clip of her talking to him. And after the interview, she made this point about presumptive language that I thought was useful. She said, anytime you express an objection by saying no, you need to make sure you mean it, because, and I'm paraphrasing here, because no is a full sentence. And if someone talks over you, or otherwise attempts to cross that boundary, you need to ask yourself, why is this person trying to control me? In other words, what's in it for them? So we need to keep that in mind. What's in it for them when somebody tries to talk over your no? So this member who wrote to me went on to say in her email, quote, I didn't know what presumptive language is, so I searched, what is presumptive language? And here's the part that I just looked at with my mouth open, but not yet, because I didn't have the evidence yet with my own eyeballs. She says, quote, the only thing that came up was how healthcare providers should talk to parents about childhood vaccines. Each article explained the importance of and specific examples of how to overcome a parent's vaccine hesitancy by using language that presumes they will vaccinate. After that, the member said, quote, I am continually amazed at the ugliness of the healthcare industry. Well, I could not agree more, but I could not believe that with all of the situations where presumptive language manipulation could apply, that it is apparently nearly exclusive to the medical field. I Googled it too and got the same results, article after article, encouraging healthcare providers to use this tactic on parents to overcome their objections. And in case you're wondering, here's an example of a tactic that might be used by a medical provider. And this example I pulled from a website that is coaching pediatricians on how to talk to people about their vaccine hesitancy. It says, quote, instead of saying, what do you want to do about shots today? That leaves the question open, right? This is me. Continuing with the quote, an approach using presumptive language would be to say, quote, your child needs 3 vaccines today. Some patients and parents may have questions or concerns about vaccination. This does not necessarily mean they will not accept vaccines. So that's encouraging the practitioner to argue and to press their case. So how does this apply to dogs? Well, the member that wrote to me about this said she tried to find out if the same tactics are being used by vets and couldn't find anything specific, but she guesses that the vets are being trained similarly. And what I would have to say about that is I'm not sure that it's as organized in veterinary medicine or out in the open as it is in human medicine. And I think that's probably changing in just the last couple of years because of all this recent hesitancy publicity that we've seen in the mainstream press. The vet schools are going to be picking up on that, and they are going to be introducing these same tactics into their training, I'm quite sure, on top of all the other stuff that they have to teach vets, that they do teach vets. So I expect when they start seeing real pushback, like from pet owners, like they've gotten from parents, it will be used more often. And, vets already do that because they will ask you if your dog's been vaccinated. They will require your dog to be vaccinated. Well, it's normal, right? And that's because historically pet owners have pretty much just gone along with the narrative. Pet vaccines have a long history of complete public acceptance. And it's just been pushed as the responsible thing to do. And that's just now beginning to crack a little bit. But whether vets are formally trained in this tactic or not, it's something to be aware of, because we all need to make sure that when we say no, we're willing to hold the boundary. And I thought it was really interesting when I did go looking for information about presumptive language and how it's used. I got this little graphic that teaches pediatricians how to talk to their parents that they talk to. It says, number one, to assume the acceptor status for all parents. So assume that everybody that you're talking to is accepting, is receptive. And then it says deliver 3 C's, deliver the recommendations with the 3 C's. And the 3 C's are confidence. I remember the other 2, but they say use presumptive language, make sure that vaccines are perceived to be bundled and equal, and same-day vaccination is pushed. They don't want you to leave without getting the vaccine. If you express any hesitancy or doubt or skepticism at all, they will not want you to leave, because they will know you're going to immediately go home, get on the internet, and read all those scary stories that they want to tell us are not valid. So, but for right now, like I was saying, it seems to be more of an issue when talking to human medical providers. But the fact is that, the fact that it's so incredibly exclusive, just Google it yourself, you guys. I was just absolutely shocked. And it's behind the scenes. These people act like they're talking amongst themselves, but they're coaching each other on how to manipulate us. And we're like listening. Isn't anybody hearing that? It just seems crazy to me. Okay, so I got some questions coming in already. Excellent. Okay, I got a question from the group, and I got a question from email that I wanted to address. And then I have one more topic that I want to talk about, but I'll probably get to your questions first, because I want to make sure everybody gets their questions answered for sure. The question from the group was, you mentioned last week about giving plant fats as part of the last meal, as part of the meal. Does this mean after his last meal to wait an hour and give him some fat? Or since I feed him 3 times a day, give him the fat instead of his regular meal as the last meal? Can I mix the fats too, like avocado, coconut meat, and nut butters? Also, for nut butters, I noticed most places where you can put the nuts through the machine are all roasted. Is that okay? I would maybe give him almond butter. Well, I've seen those. You've probably seen those nut butter making machines in the health food stores. I don't think they're as popular as they used to be, unfortunately, because they're probably better. In fact, they are better, to have people making their own nut butter, even if it is cooked. But she says, okay, she would give him almond butter. Well, for my feedback on that, I'm not huge on feeding nut butters in the first place. It's kind of interesting to me that they seem to be acceptable to people who claim to feed strictly what wild dogs have access to, because I'm pretty sure that wild dogs don't have food processors. But at the very least, the nut butters should definitely be raw. And I'm open to feeding nut butters. If you feed nut butters and you see a dog gaining weight that wasn't gaining weight before, and you don't see any other problems, I think it's perfectly fine. But like I was saying, the nut butters should be raw, except for peanut butter. Raw peanuts do not make butter. I don't think you could even make peanut butter out of raw peanuts. But every other, because peanuts really aren't nuts at all. They are legumes. But like almonds should definitely be raw, because nut butters go rancid at room temperature within like a week or 2. And typically what you find in stores is probably months old. And don't be intimidated by the idea of making your own raw almond butter, because it is super easy to make. If you have a food processor, all you do is dump in a cup or two, depending on how big your food processor is, and you just process them until it becomes butter. You just leave it, let it go. You might have to scrape the sides down a few times, let it go, and it becomes butter. It's fantastic. And by the way, I wanted to mention, in case anybody here is interested in truly raw almonds, I do have some. I sell them. I buy them from a farmer every year. I don't do it as a business or anything, but I buy some for my own personal use, and I buy extra for some of the people around here in my local area who like raw almonds, because I don't know if you're aware, but about 15 years ago, the almond industry decided that all almonds destined for the commercial market would be pasteurized. And they do this using either chemicals or steam. So, I buy almonds directly from the farmer, and I know that they are truly raw. And anybody who's interested in buying some, I probably have, I don't know, 15 or 20 pounds that I could part with. So you can message me if you were interested in that, or comment on the YouTube video if you like. But to get back to the question, because fats are already pretty hard to digest, and also since wild dogs don't have a lot of access to them, there's really no historical precedent for mixing them together. So I wouldn't mix them together. I would either replace a meal with avocado. So feed a whole, this is a small dog, by the way, that I happen to know. And you could offer a whole meal of avocado. Remember, I shared a couple weeks ago the study that observed all the animals that came around to eat avocados from an avocado grove, and many of them were carnivores, and they just ate their fill of avocados. So they're obviously, and that included coyotes. So anyway, avocados are definitely fair game. Or, if you can replace the whole meal with avocados, or just a mono meal, or give an afternoon snack of fresh coconut or nut butter as the last meal of the day. Okay, the next question is pretty short. Regarding fruit, can you please clarify what dates you're referring to regarding fruit meals? As far as I'm aware, the only dates available are dried with a high sugar content. At least those are the ones available in South Africa. Are you referring to fresh dates? And my answer is no, I'm not referring to fresh dates, because those are really hard to find. And in fact, I've not even seen them for a long time in a store. And the only time I have ever seen them is in the Asian stores. And I did buy some once, probably about 15 years ago, just to try them. And they're not very good, and they're pretty dense. So I would not feed them to a dog at all anyway, even if you could get fresh ones, unless the ones that I tried were not representative of what they really are usually. I don't know. But when I talk about dates, I'm referring to the brown shriveled ones that can be found in any grocery store. And it's probably the same thing that you are looking at down in South Africa. Some of the varieties are the medules, and Kadrawis are the ones that I usually buy, but there's a million different varieties. The moister, the better. You just want to look for the moisture ones. But here's the thing. They do have a very high sugar content. And for that reason, I'm not a huge fan of dates. It's not that there's anything wrong with fruit sugar. Fruit sugar is extremely healthy. But I just don't like, I don't find much that favors feeding a food that has been deliberately left on the tree until it's shriveled. And that's what they do with dates. That's what date farmers do. They just leave them on the tree until they're completely shriveled up, and the sugars are super concentrated. And that's really no different from taking a fresh fruit and putting it in your dehydrator until it shrivels up. And I don't really like feeding dehydrated foods to dogs. The water that's in food is important for humans and for dogs. So I have one more topic here, but I want to make sure that I get to your questions first. And The first question has to do with, I suspect, bile vomiting. Because if a dog is truly hungry, then there won't be anything there to vomit. Somebody asks, what about dogs that vomit when hungry? So I guess you're referring to back when I was talking about fasting. Well, obviously you're talking about bile vomiting, and bile vomiting does represent a possible exception to the rule that fasting is something that almost everybody should employ if they're having a problem with their dogs. Um, and that's only the case. It's going to be a little subjective because some people are okay with seeing their dog vomit bile once every 2 or 3 days. But then there are going to be other people whose dog is going to vomit bile 5 or 6 times a day. And that's uncomfortable for the dog. It's messy in the house. It's stressful for the family to watch. All of those things. So that represents an probably the kind of situation where you would want to just feed the dog whatever whatever kinds of foods represents the biggest departure from whatever caused the problem. And anybody coming into RMF from any kind of commercial feeding is going to be okay feeding plant foods, just feeding the the foods that are listed on the plant food list in the book. So that's what you would want to do. And realistically, even if you're coming from um, commercial feeding, raw feeding, even if you're coming from high fat PMR feeding, just taking the fat out of the diet is going to allow your dog to heal, and you won't have to put up with that. It does take several months, typically, depending on the age of the dog, for them to get over the bile vomiting. I've gone through that twice now with my dogs. The first dog was 11. No, I think he was actually 9 when I transitioned him away from high fat raw to low fat raw. And he probably took a good 9 or 10 months to stop vomiting bile completely. And it just got less and less frequent as time went on. And finally, he just didn't do it at all anymore. So that's what you can expect. Um, you know, It does typically depend on the age of the dog, because I did have kind of a different experience with my current dog, who I put on nothing but meat when she was a puppy because I had a little trouble house training her. And some circumstantial things kind of intervene. And I had, apart from the fact that Cocker Spaniels are notoriously hard to house train, I understand. Um, but so I fed her only meat just to regulate her poops a little better as far as frequency and volume and all of that. So once I started feeding her plant foods or introducing fasting, she did vomit bile when her stomach was empty. But it was probably within 3 or 4 months, it was completely gone. And she never does it now, ever. And she is almost, well, she's probably about 6.5 now. So anyway, let me know if you have any more questions about that. Had to stop fasting my husky for now. He'd kill one of my chickens each time I fasted him. Oh, huskies are too smart for the room. They are, they take matters into their own hands. I used to care for a husky, and she was such a challenge, because my business had to do with taking groups of dogs off leash to trails and whatnot. So everybody had to be super good on recall, right? Teaching recall is something that's a skill that I have honed to a science, because everybody had to, stick around. And if they didn't stick around, I had to make sure that when I called them, they would come back. Well, she was such, like I said, a challenge. She would take off. If she smelled cat food somewhere, she would be off, on somebody's porch eating their cat's food, and, you know, I'd have to go looking for her. So huskies, I can completely commiserate. They are, yeah, they're sometimes really resistant to training. Now she says, Cheryl says, I do plant days instead of fasting until I can limit his access to the birds. Yeah, limiting access to the birds is really key, but even plant foods might not solve the problem because, you know, I've noticed in my own dog when I feed fruit, her foraging kind of goes up a notch over what I observe when she is just fasting. Because you know, I think the same thing happens in dogs that happens in humans. When humans stop eating completely, within a couple of days, pretty much everybody reports that their unpleasant abdominal tension goes away. And I think it happens with dogs too. And so fasting, I think, is better if you can do that in terms of keeping the dog comfortable. And sometimes, if you do have a foraging problem like that, plant foods won't resolve it. So just FYI. He's been fine with the plant foods, thank goodness. Oh, good boy. That's great. Okay, now, till you guys have some more questions, I'll go ahead and cover this next topic that I was going to talk about. And that is an email that I got from somebody named Mariah Hope. She has a website called Paws of Prey. And she offered a list of supplements that she says fill in nutritional gaps. And she says she feeds them during particular circumstances. And the first one she lists is elk velvet antler. I can't imagine where they get this stuff. Are there really that many antlers out there that they can harvest the velvet and make a supplement out of it? Stuff must be outrageously expensive, because I just can't imagine there's a whole lot of it out there. She says, you know, the soft, fuzzy velvet that protects the bone of newly grown in antlers. Deer antlers are actually quite unique because they're the only mammalian appendage that is able to regrow. Antler velvet has been used in Chinese medicine for many years. It has been seen to aid in strengthening bones, improving the immune system, and also supporting the joints. And if you believe that improving his immune system, improving the immune system nonsense, I would invite you to read the article that I wrote about being aware of people who are trying to sell you things that boost your dog's immune system, because no such thing is possible, because there's no such thing as the immune system. And I guess you'll have to tune into my regular Q&As to get the whole story on that, but because I've talked about it many times. But she says that her dog doesn't have any joint or ligament issues, but she likes to add elk velvet to his meals to support them. So what I would have to say about that is, since elk antlers may be a part of a dog's natural diet, and that's a big may, because I think most of the time when wolves take down elk or deer with antlers, the antlers pretty much get left at the scene. But this particular supplement sets itself apart from the rest of these on the list, but it's still absolutely ridiculous to think that there's anything in antler velvet that a dog needs. And people love to cite that something has been used in Chinese medicine. But what we need to remember about Chinese medicine is that it was developed because people were already making mistakes with their diets, experiencing the consequences, and wanting to cover them up. Yes, Chinese medicine is much better than allopathic medicine, but it's no more valid. And it doesn't matter how old a form of medicine is, it does not predate the adaptations that all species made that allowed them to exist in the environment they were in. Not following those adaptations is what gets people and dogs into trouble. And getting back to them is what makes things right. That's what we do in RMF. The body heals itself, and it can only do that when its needs are met. And to meet its needs, you just need to go back and observe what dogs are eating in nature and try to replicate that as much as possible. I don't see wolves eating, eating antlers. Just don't see wolves eating. Sure, if you want to buy antlers to, you've got a chewing puppy and you need something entertaining for a puppy to chew on, antlers are probably as good as anything else. It's probably a good, or the pluses and negatives about that, I don't know, but to think that there's something there that is required is crazy. And I know that we're not talking about antlers. We're talking about the velvet, but still, it just seems ridiculous to me. And it gets back to the general point that I can't emphasize enough, that when people take a food and put it under the microscope and identify its smallest parts and take those apart, it is never because doing that will truly make people or dogs well. The reason this is done is so that these parts can be sold as a product. So at the end of the day, it's about profiteering. It's about making money. It's not about being healthy. All we have to do is employ some general principles for that. Okay, the next thing on the list is milk thistle. She says, this may sound like a dairy supplement, but it's actually a flowering herb. Milk thistle is a staple in holistic medicine. There we go again, citing holistic medicine. And it's even recognized by conventional doctors due to its liver supporting functions. The active ingredient that's been seen to be very helpful to the liver is a flavonoid called silymarin. And it's been seen to aid in liver regeneration, detoxification, and stimulate cell production. None of my pets have any problems with their liver, so I don't add milk thistle to their diets on a daily basis. But if a time comes when I do have to give a chemical flea, tick, or heartworm preventative, I add milk thistle to their meals for short-term detoxification. Well, there would be no time when anybody would have to give a chemical flea, tick, or heartworm preventative, because those poisons are very hazardous to a dog's health. And to think that you can take away the hazard by later feeding something like milk thistle is not only crazy, but it is not clear cut from the research. Because on the WebMD website, it says about milk thistle, quote, medical research on milk thistle and liver health has led to mixed results. Studies show that silymarin may help ease inflammation and promote cell repair. This may help ease symptoms from liver diseases like jaundice, cirrhosis, liver cancer, and fatty liver disease. Well, how do we cure all those things? How do we resolve all those things, especially inflammation? We take away the causes. We know what inflammation is. It's just the body bringing fluids and heat to an area where healing needs to be done. If you don't want that happening, let it rest. Keep the waste load down. That's what you need to avoid that's what you need to do to avoid inflammation or resolve it. But I'm wondering how it eases symptoms, and if the herb isn't just creating a break for the liver by putting the burden on some other organ. And we don't know if these studies, and these are the favorable studies, we don't know if they're even valid or large enough to outweigh the evidence. And that evidence is mentioned in the next paragraph on the same website, WebMD. Quote, other studies don't show any effect against another liver disease, hepatitis C, which is a viral infection, A major study found that people with hep C didn't benefit even from higher than normal doses of silymarin. Researchers found no changes in virus level or quality of life in people who took milk thistle compared with those who took placebo. Well, what's the difference between hep C and those other problems of the liver? Yeah, the test, the bogus test. That's the only difference between these various diseases. So how do you make hep C better? You do the same things that you do for jaundice or cirrhosis or liver cancer or inflammation. You take away the causes and you let the liver regenerate. The liver is a very regeneratable organ, if there is such a word. So, in other words, after that paragraph, there was no difference in any of the people who took the herb over those who didn't. And these people who are writing this are separating a viral disease from a chronic disease, but we know there is no difference. There's no difference. It's just the liver being overburdened. And the bottom line with this herb is that we have to once again recognize that since there is such a strong profit motive in bringing positive news about this herb to the information stream, that's the reason we see so much favorable stuff and so little skepticism, except what comes from doctors. The doctors will be skeptical about it. But when it comes from them, we can't trust that either, because very often they'll just dismiss it because it's not a drug. So Jan has some relevant questions here about antler velvet. Antler velvet is only available a few weeks in a year. Oh, really? So why supplement something when it would be available for certain days a year? Marketing, I say. Yeah, well, they want to make sure that they get lots of money for it when it is available, I suppose. The next thing on the list is slippery elm bark. Slippery elm, it's like the cure-all, right? Slippery elm is a natural supplement I suggest all pet owners have on hand because at one point or another, you're going to need it. Slippery elm bark is derived from the inner bark of the Ulmus rubra tree, and it's an amazing thing to feed if your pet is dealing with some GI upset. Once slippery elm bark is in your pet's GI tract, it begins to stimulate mucus secretion, which in turn creates a protective barrier within the stomach and small intestines. Luckily, I haven't had to use slippery elm often, but if any of my pets experience loose stool, a little slippery elm bark always saved the day. Well, this is just so backward because, why not do the right thing? Why not remove the cause of the problem? Why not just allow the gut to rest? Because anything that stimulates mucus secretion is causing the body to protect itself from some harmful influence. Mucus isn't free. It's not something that the body just gives up and doesn't have to worry about replacing. It does that for a reason. The barrier that is created may prevent certain acidic substances from making contact with the body, but it will need to be discarded. This barrier will need to be discarded, and the mucus will have to be regenerated, rebuilt. The supply of mucus will have to be rebuilt from fluids and other resources in the body. And when this slippery elm stuff is eliminated from the body, that's a burden. It's going to burden the organs of elimination with its, disposal. Stimulation is never work. Sometimes holistic practitioners will refer to stimulation as assisting or facilitating the organs that they're supposed to work on, but that always means stimulation. And whenever there is stimulation, there always has to be a compensation phase. There has to be, you stimulate, you work, you get tired, you rest. That's the most obvious explanation or example of stimulation and compensation. So we're making an organ work harder, in other words. And I succumbed probably about 15 years ago to a holistic practitioner's recommendation that I give herbs to my cat who was suffering sickness because a neighbor was feeding him kibble on the sly. And I hadn't put two and two together and figured out he needed to stay inside in order to stay well. But he got very sick, and the holistic vet gave me some herbs for him that were supposed to help the liver. And I gave them to him, and he immediately got worse. He immediately got worse. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. The next one on the list, the last one on the list is psyllium husk. And she says, quote, speaking of the stool, something else that is helpful for the gut is psyllium husk. This is a soluble fiber that's great at bulking the stool while also promoting regularity. What I'm basically saying is not only can it relieve diarrhea by bulking up the stool, it can also relieve constipation because a bulked up stool will trigger the bowels to begin moving it along. Some raw-fed pets also struggle with expressing their anal glands because their stool isn't as bulked up as it used to be while on commercial food. So psyllium husk really comes in handy with bulking it back up. I've never had to use it for this issue, but I've had to use it a few times when my cat Tangy was a little backed up. And on the topic of cats being constipated, cats do not defecate frequently. My cat defecates probably 2 or 3 times a week. So, you know, if your cat's backed up, I don't think cats really, I don't know, maybe if a week goes by and your cat hasn't pooped, you might want to worry a little bit or do something like that. But a lot of times when people say that their cats are constipated, it just means that they haven't seen them go to the bathroom every day, and cats actually don't go to the bathroom every day. But I think we need to be careful even with dogs, assuming when they're constipated, because very often people will say their dogs are constipated because they see the poops moving out slowly. And I think that's normal. My dog's poops are very slow, and while they're happening, you know, while she's going, it might look like she's straining, but she's not. I think they just move out of the body slowly. I think that's just the nature of the beast. But when the owner wants to loosen things up, all they have to do is add more lean meat to the diet, and that's the truly natural way to address the problem. Now, when it comes to loose stools, adding more bone typically solves the problem. If it was plant foods, then putting something like psyllium husk in with your plant foods might work, but I don't see that happening very often with plant foods. I see it happening with meat. And when it happens with meat, there are things that we can do besides putting something like psyllium husk with the food. And I can't really go along with it for the anal sac issue either, because RMF includes lots of foods that bulk stools up besides bone. This gal is a raw feeder. She's a raw feeding advocate. And so she's just feeding meat to her dogs. And in RMF, there's no reason to add more insoluble fiber, which is what psyllium husk is, for the purpose of, you know, for the purpose of creating bulk for the anal sacs, because we have plant foods for that purpose. And just a reminder, insoluble fiber is the kind that the body can't use. It just goes straight through. The fiber that you eat is the fiber that you poop. Insoluble or soluble fiber is different. And it used to be hypothesized that the lack of insoluble fiber is why so many Americans, or people who eat the Western diet, were constipated. But what's not generally realized is that our natural diet doesn't include a lot of insoluble fiber, but it does contain lots of soluble fiber. And that just means it dissolves in water. And just adding that to the diet in the form of the natural sources of soluble fiber, like fruit, and getting rid of the foods that have neither kinds of fiber, will definitely solve the problem. So, well, I had a little thing about 6 reasons to feed your dog more fruit, but I haven't done much with this, so I think I'd like to work it up a little bit for next week. And so the next Q&A will happen on the 30th. So that'll be the 30th, 10 days from now. So I hope you guys who are just dropping in for this time will consider joining. And for those regular members, I will see you in 10 days, and have a good rest of your week. Before I take off, do you guys who are here have any more questions? There's a little delay when you type a comment, so I will give you a minute. I hope I covered everything that I was going to and everything that you expected. So I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'm going to sign off. So you guys take care, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much for coming. Bye-bye.